Hello, my name is Dr. Scott Davis, and I'm a professor of philosophy and the interim dean of the Cottle College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences here at Morehead State University. Today's Cottle conversation is about media and production. I'm happy to welcome here Dr. Nettie, professor of communication, and Steve Middleton, instructor of communication. We're going to be talking today about how the process of creating media has changed significantly thanks to technology, and about how some of those changes have good and bad effects in the world. So I think today we're going to start with you, Nettie, if that's okay.
That's just fine. So I wanted to get us started today sort of talking about who has access to the internet, mostly because I think that when we're talking about production, it's important to think about our audience. And we have this idea in our heads that everybody has the internet. And now a huge number of people really do have the internet. And so that is a true sort of statement. But at the same time, there's a lot of people who don't. So according to the Pew Research Center, in the United States in 2021, 93% of adults are using the internet. So that is a huge number of people. But if we move that out to worldwide, according to Statista.com, there's only 59.5% of the people around the world are using the internet. And so we can think about the United States as having most people using the internet, but around the world, that is not the case. Just slightly over half the population of the world has the internet. And so it's not everybody. And even within the United States, we still have this very drastic, what we call the digital divide. And so there are, again, most people have the internet, but how good that internet is relative. And so when we're thinking about the sorts of things we might want to create using the internet, there are limits, and we shouldn't think everybody can just watch this TikTok video really easily, because that's likely to not be the case. We can think about times where our internet has failed us, and when we may not have great internet, there are people who have that all the time. And so when we think about production, thinking about the sort of limits to what we can look at. Not everybody can watch a Netflix video, but everybody can probably read a tweet. And so, there's a difference there. But we can also think about how many different things there are that we can produce with the internet. It's not just social media, it's not just YouTube videos, there's a lot more to it than that. And the world has become a very interesting media literate space in the ways that the internet lets us work together on things that we never really thought about working together on before. And so there are three main things that I like to talk about when it comes to media literate sort of collaborative things. The first is participatory media and like Wikipedia and those sorts of spaces. Times when people literally come together to create something. We actually see this happening a lot with TikTok these days, where the TikTok videos build on each other. And so people are coming together to make things in ways that they couldn't before. But we also do this in other ways as well. Distributed computing is one of the most fascinating ones. SETI, which is looking for aliens, actually uses individual humans' computers. They're just like, hey, you can use my computer if you need to, because they don't have enough computers on site to be able to actually compute all the data that they're getting in. And so they use normal people's computers to make sense of that data. There's also, if you do CAPTCHAs, remember the old form of CAPTCHAs where it would say, like, what word does this say? That was actually archiving that they crowdsourced to all the rest of us, asking us to figure out what was in these things, because computers couldn't tell. And so it was like, does this actually say this word? Yes or no? And so that was a form of distributed computing. And then finally, we also have, just in general, crowdsourcing. And mostly in this, we have Kickstarter and GoFundMe. Most people are familiar with Kickstarter and GoFundMe, but if you're not, Kickstarter and GoFundMe are these areas where we can help people raise money for their private sort of creative endeavors. And GoFundMe has sort of horrifyingly become a way of doing insurance and raising money for medical needs, which is, there should be other ways of raising that money. But GoFundMe has become a lot of that. And so we have these ways of working together to create wonderful and amazing things, and supporting the people that we want to support while also being able to make our own things. And so that was, that's really what I think is the most interesting part of sort of media literacy production, is that we can do all of these really cool things and we can get it to just about everybody, although again, not everyone, but a lot of people, in really easy ways, and we can work together on it. And I just think that's so awesome. And everybody should definitely take advantage, and we do. I mean, we use Wikipedia really often, and so we take advantage of this a lot. So that was what I wanted to say today.
That is super interesting, and it's very positive in that way to think about all the things that we can do that we couldn't do before, thanks to these changes. So many positive things like collaboration, like you mentioned. Your description reminded me of the change in buying and selling brought about by eBay. How all of a sudden putting all these people into touch with each other who before would have no way of contacting one another. And and Craigslist. That's really interesting to think about. Your options in terms of getting things done have really changed thanks to this possible kinds of collaboration. Steve, you're next.
Yeah, start off with, I want to say, I've produced a lot of documentary films in my life, and there's only about 3 that I highly recommend people to see. But the very first film I ever produced was in 2005, and it was on mini DV tape. And at the time, that was the highest possible quality of digital media you could use. And a single high quality mini DV tape, which was 480p, was probably about 25, 30 bucks. And you needed about, I think I used about 10 to 15 tapes. So less than a couple years later is when the very first iPhone came out. Now, there were earlier smartphones, but the iPhone really, of course, nailed all of the aspects of video and high quality audio and photographs and all these things you can combine. So in a very short amount of time, media producing equipment in cameras and recording devices of all sorts for audio and video, which were terribly expensive. That original camera that I used was a Sony camera, and it was about a $3,000 camera, I think, at that time. How quickly, once smartphone technology came out and started to focus the camera technology inside the phone, the audio capability, and combine that with your basic messaging and phone capabilities, so much changed so quickly. And now, as we look at some, here in 2021, the newest iPhone that's coming out soon has higher capabilities of audio and video and photograph production than some of the other cameras here in the convergent media department. The high-end 4K cameras, the modern iPhone can do higher qualities of this. And it's not cheap, of course. Most people think that, well, it's a smartphone, it's cheap. It's not, but we get them on plans and they're more affordable that way. But from a very economic side, we went from very expensive equipment to now everyone, rightly or wrongly, that possesses a smartphone of any sort, not just an iPhone, has the ability to produce high quality video and take high quality photographs and audio recordings. So that's led to a consumer driven market, especially with social media. And because of the technological changes and the affordability of it, rightly or wrongly, people have become producers, and then the consumers are driving the market. And you add that with social media, where people can make money, and we start the economic game of producing and making money and influencing. Drastically, it has changed from being in very expensive studio and television or in film to now being able at your home or in a very simple studio setup, pretty much anywhere, use these simple devices to us to produce such high quality things so quickly.
Has been a remarkable change. I think about the change on campus and delivery of instruction that was brought about by the recent pandemic, and how now we have people who are so much better suddenly at using technology because they had to do it and do it collaboratively and create media. That's really something about the new iPhone and its capabilities. So on the plus side, I see both of you saying there's this great side of this change in that it's accessible now to people, to a much larger group of people than it was, to produce really high quality media. And so something to celebrate there. This reminds me of a discussion in philosophy about the nature of truth and authority. And just to summarize briefly, if you go back to ancient times, the truth came from the king or the priest. And now in a democratic day, it could come from anybody. The journalist could be the ordinary person who speaks the truth, and this reminds me of media. We used to think that high production value meant something like a reliable indicator of truth, but maybe now that's coming apart if it's available to everybody. Is high production value no longer a sign of reliability?
Well, one of the sort of major theories that we have in media is the TwoFlow method, TwoFlow model, which I totally spaced on the name of that for just briefly. Teach it every semester. My brain just went blah. The two-step flow model is what it's called, and it's basically you go from opinion leaders to the people that follow them, and the people that follow them do whatever the opinion leaders say, and that is really changing these days who those opinion leaders are, because back in when we had mostly only traditional media, it was the high quality things, right? And not even less necessarily, like when we think high quality, we tend to think about film and things, but news reporters. I certainly remember when I was a kid, and probably when you guys were kids, there were certain news anchors that you watched all the time. In our house, it was always Dan Rather. We would always watch Dan Rather. My parents trusted Dan Rather, and then Dan Rather nonsense happened, and it was like Katie Couric. But you always trusted those people, and so those would be your sort of opinion leaders. You would do what they would tell you to do. These days, who that person is becomes a lot sketchier, right? Who are you getting your information from? It really depends on the person, depends on who you're following on your social media, who you're watching on television. And so that quality issue does come into play a lot more, because so many more people have the ability to do things, that quality is no longer the determining factor anymore in who is sort of telling people what to do. So, yeah.
My family was a Dan Rather TV news person as well. But I agree, Nettie. And then you're starting to see the rise consumer-driven or user-driven media, both on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter to some regard. But because of smartphone technology and the ability to record in high quality, everyone felt they had a voice. Saw both good and bad with that aspect. And one of the bad, obviously, is what led to pundits or influencers who are spreading misinformation. And it is at such a high quality, it looks really good. It's very well produced, and that aspect is very dangerous. But then you get the other side of the coin. You give people the ability to have a voice that never had a voice before. So with the rise in the technology, it's definitely created this parable of realities in a way, understanding. And that's the importance of media literacy, is being able to understand the difference between the trickery. What's it Tom Wolfe wrote about the people with the black shiny shoes, the electric Kool-Aid acid test, and had to watch out for those folks who are dressing well and trying to fool you. But everything looks good now from a media perspective. I mean, this is an older phone, but it shoots in 4K, and some of the modern non-iPhones shoot higher than 4K, 6K. I mean, if you were to take a photograph and print that out, it'd be larger in its natural form than Breckenridge Hall, where I'm at right now. The power of all of that.
Well, and everybody can use Photoshop to make the things look better. Like, everybody can. I'm using one of the Adobe Creative Suite things in one of my classes, and I am not good at this. I never learned how to do it, but I can make myself into a tiny little monster and be like, hey, fun things. So anybody can do it. I'm just saying, if I can do it, anybody can do it. Make everything look good.
So in the past, when we had, very few media options, there were sort of checks and balances, so Dan Rather didn't say something until it had been vetted in a certain way. And now with so many different possibilities and so many different ways to get your message out, we don't really have checks and balances like that. Things just kind of pick up and become viral, and just based on the sort of preferences of the consumers, right? And of course, those preferences are tracked, and people are trying to determine every day how best to tap into those preferences and use them to their advantage, right? In the law, we used to have structures to regulate this sort of, truth and information. I suppose now the law is just trying to catch up, right? Are there ways in which the law tries to restrict certain kinds of speech now that are responsive to the developments we're talking about?
Oh, you're making me actually think about my classes. Yes, there are, and that is actually one of the things that I do in my elite media law class is they have to come up with new laws for the sort of changing social media environment. But there are some things that a lot of the laws that are about republication of libel and things like that do include the internet now and the ways that the internet works in those spaces. And so there are more of these sorts of laws. The EU, not too many years ago, just passed a law about copyright that makes it so that they can't use like any copyrighted materials. And so it makes the internet a very weird space in the EU, I think, because a lot of the images that we use for memes are in fact copyrighted images. And so they're really working to try to make those issues sort of fall into line a little bit better. But then we run into this free speech issue that we have been talking about as a society over the last year, where social media spaces don't count as a free speech space because they are private entities. And so, people can say whatever they want in those spaces, and it can't really be determined by anybody except those spaces. And so, yes, there are some laws, but at the same time, they are private spaces, a lot of them. And so those laws are not really relevant.
A couple of points I'd like to make is laws have changed the role of influencers, and what I mean by that is people who create content as individual users, talking about certain products, reviewing certain things from as simple as electronics to food. Some laws have been changed, and it's going state by state by state, and hopefully one day that will change drastically in the entire United States. But you have to announce who is promoting this particular review. And with the market driving consumer production, you're encouraged to obviously try to reach the largest audience possible and to make money from what you're trying to create. That's the role of an influencer. And smaller entities want larger entities to promote them, and it's a cycle. And I am amazed at how much a high-level influencer can make. Now, of course, this determines on how many followers you have, how many interactions you have, and the algorithms that go with this. But if you are a successful influencer, you can make as much as $5,000 a week on just Instagram. Now, of course, these people are way more than I would ever have on social media. Millions of followers, and they get the little blue check mark, because they're official followers. But yeah, think about that. Just using just your smartphone and produce high quality content like this. But yeah, certain laws have come in to sort of say, yeah, look, I'm being sponsored by this, and hopefully people notice that. And I just read this morning that for $200,000, you can buy a trending tweet. So you can actually end up on the trending board for $200K. And that's the entire entity of Twitter. And, if you have the money to be able to spend that type of advertising, you're definitely going to get noticed.
That is really interesting. I don't think the people who founded our country or any other one had that in mind when they talked about free speech and access to information. That's really incredible. So money does play a significant role here in how things are created and distributed. And we have another call to conversation about that question. We're also going to have a separate conversation about media literacy and critical consumption. So look forward to that. So on the plus side, we can see this opening up of access. And there, we expressed some worries about checks and balances and quality control for information. And of course, that's really important in a democracy that we have access to information. And Nettie's point is a good one, that not everybody has the same access. And so if you don't have the same internet access, you don't have the same access to all the information. That's especially clear if you go to a place like China, where I lived for a while, where they censor the internet in ways that we would not tolerate. There's another plus side to this development we've been talking about that came up in our earlier conversation, and it was about producing content that helps us know what's going on in the world, the sort of citizen journalist phenomenon. Can you say something about that and how that's influenced the way news is created and contemporary discussions flow?
Okay, to explain citizen journalism, it takes a little bit of backstory because we have to go all the way back. We have to sort of rewind in time all the way back to 2010, which feels so long ago. But before 2010, we didn't actually use the phrase citizen journalism. And then the Arab Spring happened. And for those who don't know what that was, it was that there was a series of uprisings that occurred all throughout from late 2010 all the way through 2011. And some of it is still ongoing, all of the stuff in Syria and those sorts of places. All of that is a direct result of the Arab Spring. And so most people in Western societies, like here in the United States, did not know what was happening, mostly because those governments were shutting down the internet. But then slowly but surely, the word started to get out on Facebook. And it was this very specific, bizarro phenomenon that everyday citizens were just posting what was happening on Facebook. And so then, because you can't totally filter the internet no matter where you live in the world, people can always get around it, that word got out via Facebook. And so that was sort of the real beginning of citizen journalism. But these days, even here in the United States, we have a lot of citizen journalism happening. We can think about George Floyd and the video that was released of what happened to him. That is citizen journalism, right? That is an ordinary person filming what's happening in a breaking story sort of a way and posting it online where everybody can see it. It could be live tweets, it could be anything. But so we saw that happening way back in the Arab Spring in 2010. We see this happening a lot with the police brutality these days. And then we also saw it in Hong Kong with all of the riots that were happening there recently. And so there's like all this stuff that's happening, and it is such a cool phenomenon. You know, it's horrible that we have to rely on people to get us these stories, but at the same time, like, because of all this stuff with our fancy iPhones, we can get this amazing breaking news happening as it is literally happening, which journalists cannot do, right? Because they have to get the word that it's happening, go out, get their camera, do all these things. And so by the time they got there, the story is already happened. But these days, anybody can do it, and it's amazing.
Yeah, and I'll shed a couple more comments on that. You know, and it works both ways. You've seen the great positives of exposing injustice in the world, but you know, from the other side, we're a society that's so plugged in and constantly recording everything that, you know, just because you can, should you? And you know, that brings up a great philosophical discussion. And so you see pros and cons of this. You know, whenever there's a trend, first one that comes to my mind is Chick-fil-A. When there was a lot of anti-Chick-fil-A sentiment, people were filming themselves and they were being very critical of the workers who were just working at Chick-fil-A. You know, and so it's created this other element of policing of ourselves and the roles that we play and how we will be viewed. So it's a very interesting dynamic. You know, you're going from exposing injustice and through high quality means of production to the other side of, you know, constantly being plugged in, results thereof of that.
You know, just talking about these historical developments reminds me of a show that we used to watch some time ago. I'm sure this will date me. called America's Funniest Home Videos. And of course, that was made possible only because of VHS recorders, right? And people sharing their videos. And so they would collect those together and show the funniest ones, every week. And now it seems like the internet is one giant America's Funniest Home Videos in a way. I mean, that's kind of a banal way to think about it, and harmless too, but not. I mean, but now it's sort of like everybody has a video to share all the time. It may not be funny, it may be serious, and it may be helpful, or maybe not so helpful. But it's almost like Orwell's telescreen in a way has come to live with us, and we carry it around instead of being on the wall. We're voluntarily sharing everything that's going on. So I guess to kind of draw us to a conclusion here, it sounds like things have changed dramatically recently, and in some ways, terrific consequences. In other ways, some things we might wish were different. But it is a really radical change in the way we interact with the world thanks to these developments. And so it's been very helpful to explore these questions with you, and thank you for sharing your expertise with us today. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to the next edition of Colorado College Conversations. So thank you both, Nettie and Steve.
Thank you.
Thanks.